Good morning, everyone. It's Wednesday, August 13th. It's the first day after the August WASDE. It's also the first day also of our crop tour. We're going to start in Illinois in 30 or 45 minutes today. So determine how correct is the USDA is the game plan. We've got 6 WASDE reports up till now that were very, very dull. I think special in their nature of how boring they were. And the August WASDE was very, very exciting and threw a lot of things at the marketplace. And Dan Acres, big yield revisions, stocks to use versus price, I think, is the message for the next 90, 100 days or even longer. So let's just jump into it and let me know what you think.
No, let's exactly jump into it, Ben. And the big surprise wasn't what people were thinking. We all knew there was a big crop in the field, right? I mean, that's not news today. We've been talking about it in this video for weeks and weeks and weeks, so that seems to be digested to some degree. But what was a surprise was the change in acreage. So we found about 2 million extra acres of corn. We lost about 2.9 million acres of soybeans. And you can see this in this graphics. We now have the second largest U.S. corn seedings on record at 97.3 million. I went through the FSA data, and if you look at the FSA data, which is 99.2%, it would indicate we still find another 200,000 to 400,000 acres of corn, either in the September or the October report. Soybeans at 79.8 million already counted seem to be about right. Is okay, but again, whether you're looking at 97.3 or 97.5 or higher, it's a lot of corn acres. And if you look at the size of this corn crop, you also could argue that harvested acreage is probably too low and that will need less acres for silage. So that's another adjustment that probably will be coming, and that will take harvested acreage higher. So those were the big surprises. It added about 360 million bushels of corn to the balance sheets, just the acres by itself. And in the case of soybeans, we lost about 140 or 150 million bushels. So the soybean market rallied, went through some moving averages, but the corn market is still going to stay relatively depressed because of the size of planting. Then we pile on with additionality on yield. The U.S. corn yield at a record 188.8 bushels an acre. A lot of debate of whether that's too high or where we'll end up. That's why crop tours today and next week are important. When you look at soybean yield, 53.4 bushels per acre, 53.6, excuse me. Again, a big number. But again, the soybean yield is still being formulated in the field. We can only count nodes today, but pods, if the weather's favorable, I could imagine that soybean yield still going up. We at Ag Resource think that the corn yield is substantially correct today. Now, we could maybe drop it a couple bushels an acre in September to 186, or we could raise it a couple bushels an acre, maybe up to 190. But I think that's the range you're looking at now for the September report. Bean yields probably could range between, let's say, 53 all the way up to 55. So we'll see how Mother Nature treats the bean yield. But so far in the first half of August looks relatively good. And we do have cooler temperatures and some rain forthcoming. When you look at the total pile, if you will, we'll call it production, this year's U.S. corn crop is larger than last year's U.S. crop and ending stocks combined. Think about that. That's just a big, big pile of corn. So when you think about 16.7 billion bushels, we're going to add on top of that 1.3 billion, and you come up with over 18 billion bushels of corn, something we've never had in the United States at one point in time. So a very massive supply of U.S. corn. Soybeans up about or down about 80 million bushels because of that loss of seeded acreage, looking at a crop of around 4.29 billion bushels. It's down again, but again, it's only down 80 million bushels from last year. So still a sizable crop, but we are going to, because of extra crush demand, have a tightening balance sheet, at least in soybeans, depending upon exports, and we'll talk about that in a minute. U.S. Secretary Treasury Basse said this morning that the U.S. trade team will not meet Chinese officials for 2 or 3 months. I don't see this as bullish. I am not seeing any indication of China in the U.S. soybean market nearby. I still believe the Chinese are negotiating from a position of strength and power. They do not want to buy soybeans from the United States until a trade deal is substantially complete. So for me, until the two presidents, Trump and Xi, get a meeting together or are willing to meet, I think a trade deal is a long ways off, maybe something like the end of the year, like December or after. So with that, the soybean market is going to be struggling. And I would argue to everyone that maybe the corn market is a supply-driven bear, but we are looking at a soybean market, if we don't have China, could become a demand-driven bear. And so it's key to think about both of them differently and importantly. So soybeans have rallied here because of the report. I question whether or not that rally can continue if we do not have Chinese soybean demand. We at Ag Resource are down about 250 million bushels, or nearly 2 to 250 from USDA. So we're carrying much larger ending stocks on soybeans relative to the lack of Chinese demand that we see in September, October, and potentially the first half of November. Lastly, let's talk about that pile of corn and what big really means. And so if you look at Ag Resource, we are looking at ending stocks with China somewhere in the vicinity of 2.575 billion bushels. That would be a stocks to use ratio of about 16.6%. If we don't have Chinese demand and they don't buy any U.S. corn, we think that pile could be upwards of 2.7. So if you look at those two little red arrows on the right, that would indicate that there's a potential that December corn could fall under 350 a bushel. If you do take USDA's estimate at 13.3 stocks to use and ending stocks of 2.11, that gives you a price target on the downside somewhere around 370. So I doubt that December corn can reach its head much above $4, maybe $4 to $4.05. But with this pile of corn, it's going to be difficult for corn to really reach the upside. I know there's going to be a lot of debate about yields, but until we get that September report or get real evidence, I doubt the corn market can do much to the upside, relatively speaking. Lastly, Ben, we'll talk a little bit about storage capacity, because if we add it all together and we look at all the crops, including a very big sorghum crop, also, we are up stretching the upper echelons of U.S. storage capacity of 90%. In regional areas like the plains, where we're going to have a big corn and soybean crop and sorghum crop, I would imagine that we're going to see piles of gold because there is not enough storage capacity. This is going to pressure basis levels, particularly if we don't have any Chinese demand that will be sucking in from the Gulf in terms of exports. So again, when you look at storage capacity, this is not going to be bullish of the basis market as we look forward to the month of November or December. So again, for the U.S. farmer, I'm sorry to say that we've got a very big crop. You're going to make more money on yield. But when we think about what prices are going to do, I'm still rather pessimistic due to the supply of corn, Ben, and also because we believe we're not going to be seeing any Chinese demand, which kind of shifts us into a demand bear market. So I don't know if you've got any follow-up points. That's how we see things today, and that's what kind of the footprints of the market are left from the USDA report on yesterday.
Oh, it was a great summary. And, again, we're always about cash markets, forward thinking, risk management. So we've got a bit of a bounce in the soybean market recently. And so what do you do with it? That's the question. I think Chinese demand is a concern. In corn, I think a question that can be asked is, where do you go from here on yields? It was a big upward revision, even by state records, on about half the corn belt pretty easily. So what's next in September? But I think it's about bushels. Even if you trim yield and total supplies in October, November, 17.5 billion bushels, that's still the most that we've ever seen. So we are thinking about forward cash markets, storage capacity. What does basis do? And today and tomorrow, we'll kind of dive in to see how good NASS was, or those survey and vegetation health model-based yield estimates were. So starting with plant populations, of course, but we've even got an idea about how to extend this beyond just counting nodes and soybean plants to see if we can get a little more accurate in the soybean yield. So stay tuned for that. Of course, if $1 gets you in, you'll get all the updates. They will be numerous. We'll have a summary on Friday or over the weekend to tell you what we think, how our data compares to last year. We'll be with heavily revered crop analyst Jim Quinton, who started the Pro Farmer Tour many, many years ago. So it's going to be a good couple of days in getting the details of the U.S. crop right. But to your point, Dan, I don't think any market needs to ration supplies today. So just think about that as the markets do what they do the next couple of days. So supplies will be large. Will China buy soybeans? Those are the questions. So as always, all the best in the markets today. I think we got some volatility, and we'll be back tomorrow with more info and just kind of a summary of day one of our crop tour.